Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Leadership Void Podcast. I'm Enrique with my co host Vince to bring you the best in our veteran, military spouse, and first responder community. And Vince will introduce today's guest.
Oh, yeah, Enrique. Guess what? We are culminating the month of June with this young man here, Charles McCaffrey. He is the Director of Veterans Career Program at Paralyzed Veterans of America from Alexandria, Virginia. Charles, it's so great to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Fitz. Thanks, Enrique. Great to be here. Appreciate it. I'll start with what I'm currently doing. So the director of the Veterans Career Program at Paralyzed Veterans of America. So a little bit of a misnomer, right? So do not have to be paralyzed to receive assistance from us. The focus is on veterans with spinal cord injury or dysfunction. But I'm really excited to be almost coming up on 3 years being the careers program guy. Will help any member of the military community. So, we don't ask if you're post 9/11, pre 9/11. We don't ask about your discharge status, anything like that. You do not have to have a disability, service connected or otherwise. We'll help spouses, family members, and caregivers all with our career services. And our focus is really on a career and not just a job. We work very closely with our clients. I've got an incredible staff of counselors around the country who really talk about what are the interests, what's the background, what is it that you want to do. Um, for veterans who do have disability and receive disability benefits, sometimes there's a concern about going back to work and losing the benefits. We are very well versed in that and can assist with that. And then this past year, or last year, we started a self-employment program or small business training. And that's kind of my background. And that's been really successful. There's a lot of interest in that and looking forward to expanding that program. So if I kind of then shift back, Navy veteran, did so when I joined way back in the Stone Age, it was cryptology, so codes and code breaking. And over the years, we've had several different names, C2W officer and info warfare officer and information operations officer. I don't even know what it is today, but it was a lot more of cybersecurity, information protection and things like that. And so, that was my, time in the military. And then actually when I left the military, went to work for a defense contractor like a lot of us do. And then a friend of mine said, "Hey, I'm opening an Italian deli in central Pennsylvania. Are you interested in being a business partner?" And my thought process was, I like Italian sandwiches, so yeah, why not? Right? And then it was 2 years of on-the-job training that, on the business aspect of it. But that was kind of got rebitten by the small business bug. I was the kid that had, I grew up in Montana. So when it snowed, I went out and had customers that I shoveled their sidewalks and their driveways, and I raked leaves and mowed lawns and you name it, and so getting that entrepreneurial spirit back after the military, and then did about a decade at George Mason University with their community business partnership, working as an SBA resource partner. Went on to be a Main Street director right before the pandemic hit. And so going from supporting about 350 small businesses in DC to trying to help them survive. And then, like I said, about 3 years ago with the career program and bringing on the small business piece. I'll also say, just a toot my own horn a little bit here. Recently joined, there's an advisory committee under the SBA for Veteran Business Affairs. Joined them in June of last year. And then earlier this year was elected the chair. So I get to do that for the next 2 years, and that is focusing on recommendations to government agencies on how to better support veteran business owners. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, I love that background, specifically the Navy. No favoritism there, but thank you for your service in the Navy. Interesting enough, cryptology is information dominance warfare now, and the AGs, which is what I was, are all coupled into that big family. So we're distant relatives in the Navy
Right.
by rates, but thank you for that. And I love the fact that you mentioned career versus job. And I was a career counselor for a long time in the Navy. And I know that out here, career versus job is so important. So thank you for providing that piece to the service members that are transitioning and veterans at large, which I also love that it's a big blanket that you guys cover. But I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit more specifically about PVA and your role there.
Sure. So PVA was started shortly after World War II by paralyzed veterans returning from the war, making sure that a lot of things I think that we take for granted as veterans now about healthcare and benefits were extended to those with spinal cord injuries and dysfunction. That includes MS, ALS, any number of other um, dysfunctions that can occur. And so we've always been a very strong advocate in that respect. And so we have a medical services staff, we have a veterans benefits staff, we have an architecture department that all kind of work together on a regular basis, going to the VA medical centers, in particular the spinal cord injury units, and making sure that they're accessible and staffed and getting the best treatment possible. The other half of that is what happens after recovery, right? Because that's always a big thing. I talk about folks or about a lot of folks that we work with that they don't go through the traditional transition from the military, where they've, make a decision and maybe have a year or two to make that transition out. Usually it's something fairly catastrophic, and they find themselves, in a VA medical center, wondering if life will ever be the same. And in a lot of cases it won't, but it doesn't mean that it won't be same and different, right? But a lot of times we initially talk to the parents or to a spouse just to reassure them that focus on the treatment and the rehabilitation. But things like we have a sports and rec department, and we are gearing up for the National Veteran Wheelchair Games that we co-host with the VA every year. It's going to be down in New Orleans at the end of July. Going to be record attendance this year, over like 600 wheelchair athletes competing in like 40 different events. And I have gone the last couple of years, even when they hosted it in Tempe, Arizona in July, when it was 115 degrees. But I was told it's a dry heat, so that's different and better somehow. But it's such an amazing event because these are folks who maybe never competed in sports before an injury, but now are finding that's part of their recovery, part of the camaraderie that we shared when we were in the military, now as veterans, and just we have a few Vietnam era veterans who compete, and they're like, I never got a reception like this when I came home, but never thought I would be getting medals and applause and everything at an athletic event as well. So a big part of what we do is the restoring hope to folks. And so when we talk about the career aspect as well, and we find this all the time. And this one story I love to tell, gentleman who was an electrician's mate in the Navy, got out of the military, was an electrician, had an injury that resulted in a spinal cord injury. Had the time to rehabilitate, and finally reached out and said, I want to go back to work. I'm still young. I want to go back to work. And the counselor was like, okay, well, do you want to stay in electronics or electrical? It's like, no, I've always wanted to be a chef. And, you know, if I've learned anything from the accident, it's do the things that you're passionate about, that you want to do. And, got right to work on getting him into a culinary arts program, finding a restaurant that had like an accessible kitchen, and we're trying to hire persons with disabilities and make sure that they had the accommodations and access right and everything, and transportation and everything else that went along with it. And he's just absolutely loving what he's doing now. And so that's, the best part of my day is when I hear those success stories.
Oh, absolutely, Charles. I got to say, you are restoring hope in PVA as well. It seems like you're empowering, the vets, validating and adding value, as your story eloquently said about the gentleman that went to the culinary arts area. And also, talk about culinary arts. You went from the Italian deli, and here you are today. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. What lessons learned would you like to share, or challenges about entrepreneurship with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a positive and a negative, if you will. So, I think there is this mentality that somehow we are all born to be business owners, that we just have this innate knowledge about starting and growing a business. Um, and That's not true. That there's a lot of education that goes along with it. And you talk about other careers, and it's like whether it's apprenticeship or college or anything like that. I'm not saying you have to have an MBA to be a business owner, but there is a certain level of education that you do have to get and continue getting. Even to this day, I'm still learning different aspects of small business and small business startup and everything like that. Um, but it is also one of those fields that anybody can do if they, you know, put their mind to it. There's, for lack of a better word, there's no discrimination in small business startup, from the standpoint of, you can have any background and have any business idea and give it a try. And so it really comes down to how much time and effort you want to put into it. I do find from a lot of folks in teaching small business that they come in with certain preconceived notions and very quickly go, wow, this is a lot of work. And it's like, it really is, which is why most small business owners look tired all the time. But I love that aspect of it. And just being able to see how technology has changed small business and made it more accessible to folks. Yeah, and just one of those things that it's like I love doing. Vince, you're very familiar with dog tag, and I recently went out to Chicago for their graduation out there. One of our PVA members was graduating. I think our first PVA member to graduate from dog tag, and just to hear, why he got into it. He had a career in the military as in acquisition and contracting, but wanted to pursue, like, being a handyman as a small business owner, and just to hear the stories and there's the start with why. And a lot of that is where we start is, why do you want to do this?
And that's a great question to start off with, especially we got to go into entrepreneurship. I believe all three of us know the ups and downs of that and the effort that it requires to maintain something like that. But thank you for your entrepreneurship spirit as a young man. And then you went ahead and started to put that into some sandwiches, which, hey, you just made me hungry for sure. But, we learned some lessons there, and thank you for sharing those. Now, I wanted to ask you what's on the horizon for PVA and here in the future.
Yeah, there's always a lot of legislation that PVA is looking at. In particular, we're very focused on barrier-free transportation or travel. And I always tell folks, it's like, think about the last time you flew on a commercial airplane. Did you want to get up and use the lavatory? And it's like, probably not. Now imagine, being in a wheelchair. A lot of these folks do not eat and dehydrate themselves prior to getting on the plane because they're unable to use the lavatory facilities that are there. So we're looking at legislation to assist with that. And always just, benefits and making sure that the VA is properly staffed and properly educated, specifically on those with spinal cord injuries, but just in general, assisting the veteran community. So that's an ongoing thing with PVA as a whole. With the career program, and this is part of the entrepreneurial spirit, is just trying things. And that was my background. I had asked around if we had ever had kind of a small business program, and was like, kind of, fits and starts. And so I was like, let me see if, at least starting with the members of PVA, if they're interested in small business startup. And when I put together the invite for my first 10-week class, I was like, man, if I can get 2 or 3 people, I'll be happy. And I had 70 people apply. So, and that's just within the membership and members themselves. And so, I'm a one-person show when it comes to that. We're looking to expand and bringing on some more small business counselors, because we've now done it 3 times. We're going to start our fourth cohort in August. And there's always between 40 and 80 folks who apply. We've expanded it to spouses and to family members and caregivers who are all interested as well. And then we would love to be able to offer it out to the larger disabled veteran community. But obviously that's going to take some resources as well that, we're looking for and looking forward to being able to do.
No, Charles, you had that vision, to empower, and now also to have that career opportunities for those in need. So thank you for sharing that vision and knocking at that door and knocking that wall down. And here it's going to grow into something even bigger and better. Early on, you talked about, and we're going to transition about leadership, talk about that educational piece is constantly evolving and constantly, sharpening your skill set. So what do you do to sharpen your skill set to aid you to thrive in your professional life?
Sure. There are leadership programs around the country. So like here in the DC area, there's like Leadership Fairfax, Leadership Maryland. I think there's programs like that that I've been involved with, nationwide, like the Bush Institute on Leadership does programs and things like that. I have not been fortunate enough to have been accepted into that yet, but I will keep trying. But I think for me, the bigger thing is I read all the time. It is, books of all, fiction, nonfiction, the newspapers, magazines, things like that. But I think most importantly is I do a lot of traveling. And in that traveling, I get to just experience things, right? So museum exhibits and food and culture and everything. And I take advantage of it. And I do know folks who travel and never leave the hotel, and for whatever reason it is, and maybe I'm just not self-conscious enough or self-aware enough to be worried about going into the bad parts of town and stuff like that. I just like to go explore and talking to people. And as you see people doing things, you pick up ideas, and it's like, yeah, let's give it a try. And that, really led back to, circling back to, well, let's, as they say, let's throw this against the wall and see if it sticks. And if anybody's interested in a small business program. But I do, last night with Armed Services Arts Partnership, I did a storytelling as part of a showcase. But from that, I have been asked to do public speaking and talk about pitches and things like that. And it when folks see somebody doing something, they tend to want to engage, and it kind of grows, whatever it is that you're doing. And I think personally, that's what's helped me grow and as an individual and as a leader.
Well, life experience definitely is one of those things that we basically tie ourselves into so we can develop and grow. And once you take yourself away from that, you start to die on the vine. So I'm glad that you explore that piece of life as a leader, as a person, and then you take in so many different things that come from different people, and that makes you more flavorful, right? You have more colors in your life, and so I really applaud you doing that. Now, as you was growing up, young entrepreneur, served in the military, and then went into a service here out in the community. What advice did you receive during that portion of life that you would like to pass on to an emerging leader today?
Yeah, that one's, I've received a lot of good advice over the years, but the one that stands out the most to me. So I was in Navy ROTC, so I was transitioning from enlisted to officer. And every summer you go out and you go to a ship, or they have kind of a tour where it's like the Marine Corps and submarines and the naval air and stuff like that. And I was in Charleston, and I was I was assigned to a ship that had just come back from deployment. It was in dry dock. It was undergoing repairs. So not a whole lot going on outside of engineering. And so I was down with two other midshipmen. They chose to follow the navigator and the admin person. So I usually saw them leaving the ship by about noon. But I chose to work with the engineering folks. And so I was in coveralls, and I was in the bilges and doing all that. And I loved it, right? I like to work, right? I like to feel productive. And I was working with the senior chief petty officer, and he said, I hope you don't mind if I know you're going to be an officer, but can an enlisted guy give you some advice? Yeah, absolutely. And he said three things that have always stuck with me. He said, one, you are a leader, not a manager. So, set the vision, set the tone, but let your senior enlisted folks manage the troops. The second thing he said was say yes more often than you say no. And that was not only to your folks, right, and encourage them to do things, but for yourself as well. Meaning, if you get offered a duty station that maybe is not your preferred duty station, and maybe you've even heard, oh, that's an awful duty station, say yes, because you never know what your experience there is going to be, and what might not be an ideal duty station for somebody else might be perfect for you. And then the last piece was have sufficient insubordination. He said there are always going to be people above you that are going to pass things down that you don't agree with. Doesn't mean you have to be a rebel every time. Pick your fights, but don't be afraid to find a mountain to stand on. And as well, let your folks do that as well. Trust your senior NCOs, if they don't do exactly as you said, there's probably a reason for it, and let them have sufficient insubordination as well. So those have been the three things that probably to this day. And I know if you asked any of the bosses that I have worked for, they would be like, "Oh yeah, he's got the insubordination thing down." So
That's very funny. That senior petty officer imparted his wisdom, his experience to you. So great advice for being a leader. Those three tenets are pretty important. And also love to hear about a memorable leadership aha moment you've had as well there, Charles.
I'm still trying to figure out how to exactly phrase this, but kind of an aha moment of things happen for a reason. We may not understand at the time why they happen because, I'm sure most of the folks that you bring on the podcast are very successful and very driven and things like that. And so there's always, well, why isn't this working? And we take it very personally when that happens. And so just the being able to accept things. And to give this an example, so I had worked for an organization, a nonprofit, for about a decade. The executive director, who had been there for about 20 years, was retiring. I was interviewing for the position. There were a few other folks outside the organization that were interviewing, and had a dream one night. I think I was in Portland, Oregon, and trying to get onto like a ferry or something like that, taking me up the river. I don't even know if they have ferries in Portland or not. But that's where I was. I had a backpack. I'm trying to get, I guess, upriver or something, and they wouldn't let me on. They were like, "Hey, we're full. Sorry, can't let you on." And so the ferry took off, got about 100 yards away from the pier, and then just tipped over and sank. And the very next day, I was not offered the position, and obviously disappointed. But as history revealed, a lot of bad things happened at that organization. I was actually terminated because quote unquote leadership wanted to go in a different direction. Unfortunately, it was a little bit of an illegal direction that caused them to lose funding, and folks were fired and things like that. And I just think, well, if I had been allowed to get on that ship, I might have been the person put in the position that sunk a career. And so I have a friend of mine. He always rolls his eyes when he'll mention something, he didn't get into a program or something. I'm like, things happen for a reason. And it just time and time again, it shows that it's like, yep, the best thing to do is accept it and move on. What's the next project? What's the next thing to get with? So I would say that's probably my aha moment.
And what a powerful aha moment indeed, to have an inclination, if you will, as to something coming up in the future. And yes, sometimes the things that we see go by and we really wanted it could be our demise. And it almost was, right? Had you not been given that shut door and shown somewhere else. But, it's important as leaders, is important as people of service to understand that sometimes that is in our favor, although it may cause some challenges internally, right? And talking about challenges, what are certain strategies that you use with yourself or your team when times of change and challenge come?
I would say the because you never know when they're going to come, right? So, in January of 2020, we didn't know what was going to happen in March, right? That was going to affect us health wise, business wise, you name it. And so it's kind of the military mentality of preparing before you need to act. And so I work with my staff. Every year we review the strategic plan, that I created a couple of years ago. And it's like, hey, we said this was the 5-year plan. Where are we? What have we accomplished? Where do we need to pivot? Having that communication and conversation, and them knowing that they can always reach out to me, and not to be concerned about asking questions, and certainly the why questions, and me as a leader trying to anticipate, and not just being, well, because I said so. It's like, hey, this is why we're pivoting, this is why we're adjusting. But nothing's in concrete, right? That if we find that it isn't working, we can adjust, and making them feel like they are part of the team. That it's not just, we have this idea of a hierarchy, and it's like, yeah, sure, the buck should always stop with me, but we're part of a team, and I just have to say, I don't know if my team will listen to the podcast or anything, but they are the most amazing individuals I have had the pleasure and the honor to work with. That they're just so dedicated and so patient, and yeah, they're just great to work with. And so, part of that is creating an environment for them to be their best selves at work and away from it.
Yeah, absolutely, Charles. Creating those expectations and giving them the power to be the greater version of themselves is so important. Over communicate is always key, because you never know what you're going to get right in the future. So, great example, great advice. We love what you're doing. We love Paralyzed Veterans of America. So, folks listening, do they contact you, or how do they get a hold of Paralyzed Veterans of America?
Sure. So definitely visit the website. So it's easy, pva.org. Lots of tabs that they can explore and everything like that, and see all the services and everything that we offer. But for me, if they want to reach out to me specifically, just charlesm@pva.org will get to me. And if I need to get you to another department or anything like that, I'm happy to do it. But that's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Well, great having you, Charles. And folks, we will have all that information as part of the show notes and the video for you to get a hold of Charles or PVA. And if you'd like to get a hold of us at the Leadership Void podcast, the leadershipvoid@gmail.com is where you'll send that correspondence. If you like a special leadership topic or a guest featured on the show, you'll do it by those means.
And also, we'd love to thank our sponsors, Triple Nickel, A Hero for Kids, and FAVOB. But today, it's all about Charles, PVA. Thank you, Charles, for being here. Great seeing you, and good luck in your future.
Thanks, Vince. Thanks, Enrique. Really appreciate it.